literally the edge of empire. Now the only way to get out of here, the minimum requirement, was to lose
a large and powerful kingdom that lay not far away across the sea.
Guyana means land of many waters and reflects
The Diana crash investigation was the biggest in French history. It was carried out by the country.
rite of passage.
That number mean anything to
Yeah,
you?
every day of the year, I guess. Well, they knew what they were doing, these Maya.
The building represents an annual.
Headed offshore to rendezvous with the search area it was assigned. We know about a half hour after taking off, there was an explosion.
How close he seemed to be with these statements, like saying,
Some bison take refuge in the stinking sulfurous.
Not everyone who gambles goes on to develop a disorder. But meeting Wes reminded me that even as a teen...
They can strike without warning.
To actually find a site with no human interference gives us this unique chance to investigate.
About that.
In real terms, that means that your children or yourself might be going to buy.
Was John Skip.
On this day, when we remember the passion of our Saviour, we do well to recall his words in the temple.
Asteroids and seaquakes seem.
This view was supported by the work of German philosopher Immanuel Kant.
I'm either going to win all your money or I'm going to lose all of mine.
Yeah.
And unfortunately...
Probably the Aqua Grande of November the 4th, 1966.
Life proliferates, of course, near the seashore, and they do so despite...
Kinshasa is one of Africa's biggest and fastest growing cities.
Is communication coordination.
Plans are in place to run the stock exchange.
To survive, they must master the hardest task of all. Killing the half-ton Cape.
To find out, I'm meeting Jiang Junmin, the head...
Hunt again. The alpha male...
I'm very nervous about the climb, yes.
Education, media, family law. It had...
The dragon played the part of innocent bystander and worked himself closer. His top speed is...
Sex trafficking in the US. In popular imagination, women are forced across borders and held against their will.
Immense shoals of fish.
They just had enough of the man and his rather rough and abrasive management.
In the kitchen. And we'd gone in the kitchen and she'd said, there must be at least 5 or 10.
One day, there was this competition. It was up in Manchester.
Have you noticed any trends in the past 4 years with the types of brandings?
Enough about them not to be caught, for instance, if they're buying one, to give too much money for it, or if they're selling one, nothing.
To see us and look at us.
They had abandoned their Scandinavian language.
And when you look at a map of Northeast Asia, it's a pretty compact area. And you're seeing Russian Far East interests.
As opportunists, they'll eat anything they can overpower.
And he was, of course, one of the people who made the marriage possible. But political divisions...
Urban therefore turns to one of the most powerful and dangerous forces in...
The basic form of the monument is clearly natural. But what about the gateway? The rapids.
As the first total solar eclipse over North America in 3 decades.
Who roamed the northern grasslands 1,000 years before the Mongols.
And it's this body fat that can lead to health problems.
Embarrassingly for the French authorities, it seems all the CCTV cameras along the route were switched off after 9.
All of this makes me astonished.
Diaries, you can watch a film on them, you can book a flight on them, you can... An entire new industry.
As this video shows from a test he conducted in Africa 2 years prior to work.
That was what that flight gets talked about today.
At least once a week. That's been kind of eye-opening.
The regulation, as a result, was light touch.
I'll see you later. All the best. In 1063, he invaded the county of Maine, which lies to the south.
The reason they let go is because it's thought that people are not nutritious.
And into critical natural areas like the Amazon to make that happen.
But the elite in society were indifferent to any notions of unease.
I had totally lost my awareness of my body in the ocean at this point.
We checked every single town in the 92nd and 78th districts.
My private secretary wrote, Dr. Owen has commented, this is on 12th of June, just before he was coming, who agreed to his visit, question mark, did I, question mark, if I did.
Anne is not as she had hoped. Henry
is rarely seen by the outside world. For the young girl at its center, this initiation into womanhood is a vital...
Afghanistan will someday be on everyone's tourist list.
It was the most sacred vow of all.
Thinking around life after death.
In the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, there's no explicit reference to anything like the dead going to...
He claimed that he was tortured, that he was actually put on a form of rack, that he went 3 notches.
Unusually warm seas have caused many of the reefs to bleach in this way.
Where the super rich hide eye-watering amounts of money around the world.
We're talking about presidents, we're talking about prime ministers.
Slowly but surely. And it's these changes, hidden under the trees and tortured rock, that are predicted to unleash...
Timbru, ca să zic așa, pe un propriu mesaj, care e un mesaj naționalist. L-am folosit pe Ceaușescu drept cămilă. Ne-am pus deșagii ideilor.
Deep in an African riverbed, there's a place where a mere drink of water can turn deadly.
You got to completely rebuild yourself up. To love yourself is one of the hardest things to do.
It's far too hot for water liquid clouds to form here. But instead, these clouds would be made.
Even though there are masses of people, the country seems able to feed them all. Though their diet may not be abundant, you don't see the hunger that you do in some countries. And beggars are seldom seen.
He looks like a man who's on the brink of a heart attack or some other catastrophe. It's possible.
And you think of all the nuclear power stations that are along the coast.
Analysis of the coral could also...
My father was detained and...
But a group of scientists in San Diego, California.
So good. I think this is going to be a really interesting expedition. I think it's going to be really...
It might be no trailer, boys. This is all I got. See, my castle. This is my castle. Do you know what I mean?
Current sea level now.
After the volcano became extinct 30 million years ago, wind and rain eroded the mountain down to... Make a routine observation of stars in the constellation.
The DPRK was banned from competition, but the games went on. A huge coming.
Initially built of modest size to facilitate irrigation in the 19th century.
So, you know, there's the ongoing advice, there's the fees of setting up these.
There you go.
You see the flickering of the plasma? That's a very narrow space. We had to land in that space.
She's being put into an MRI scanner that monitors brain activity.
Because of the sheer numbers involved in it.
But the Maya also used the cenotes to offer jewelry and beautiful ceramics to a fearsome water god.
All of Tutankhamun's treasures in one place for the first time in 100 years.
Having all of the pieces from the tomb of Tutankhamun.
During the winter months.
Animals desperately try to get away from the hellish inferno, but many succumb to the flames.
On the ground floor, and it's better to stay on the upper floor.
We are in a race to develop fuels.
If you look at the letters he wrote in the beginning of January 89...
The story of the Congo is often the story of lost or squandered opportunity.
And in 1517, the Pope's pet project was the rebuilding of St. Peter's on a magnificent scale.
Her husband, Rob, is refusing to dump the sweet treats.
Right, I'm just gonna shove all my stuff over there so that...
Aggression and violence is acceptable and tolerable, and it's kind of promoted by the state. And this is the very last...
That the wily Bohemond showed his hand.
These old males...
Safeguarded to meet all our development needs.
Singapore is planning decades ahead.
This is the southern edge
For the next 50 years. But some in Singapore are looking...
And it was his ability as a political analyst that enabled him to advance.
But just when things were going so well for Machiavelli, the men...
Like a giant yo-yo in space.
Is also a no-go zone for men. This was where the women...
This expedition to Mount Liko. We've got a great team together, lots of specialities, lots of nationalities.
And that's when I had swords and
It could be a family member, it can be a boyfriend, living in Nebraska and continuing to hang around that family.
I'm right. You've been kicked from better.
Look. Our hunter desperately clutches his prey.
But why do some of us, like Cara, get really strong cravings for sugar?
Not just about increasing the density around the transportation nodes.
Grey reef sharks hang in the current of human life. And here in Rome, its head, the Pope, ruled as...
With very tall trees, reaching up to 195 feet.
Freud and Einstein in the evolution of the way people think in 20th.
When I am gone from this world, it will go, if no one is around to continue it.
Every year.
Temujin knew he must forge links with other tribes.
To understand what's going on when you look at the data void of color.
The scan? A combination we recognize all too well.
That has perfected propaganda to an art. They're
an enormous ball of light underwater.
There was only one country in the world that celebrated it.
The last couple of days now, and it's basically ready. They're going to finish it off this morning, and then we're going to start.
I fully expected a no-comment interview, and that was what I was waiting for, but obviously...
From the same insulating tissue that keeps its prey warm.
And now he's at the center of what will be, I think, a political storm around the world.
Following in the 2,000-year-old chariot tracks of the Roman army across the Sahara is not something.
Scholars always believed it was here, in a region called...
It's been a long...
One of Japan's top marine geologists.
As it arcs up north and then south, twice crossing the equator. We'll visit its war-torn east, venture into Ebola territory.
Here too was a chance to meet the brave test pilots who would risk their lives flying the prototypes. For the French,
you can't trust anybody. And it's almost a kind of mantra for Machiavelli's own writing, I think.
The scarcity of food means many are starving. With weary
opportunity to engineer yeast to produce an anti-malarial drug called artemisinin.
Information is tightly controlled by the Korean Central News Agency, the KC.
Fading to black.
I don't subscribe to just one belief anymore. My library at home has all different beliefs.
Was it a duplex? Yeah, and I had one bathroom, a living room, and a long kitchen with a table at the end.
Allies on Tuesday, enemies on Wednesday, and then allies again on Thursday. The situation...
Any other. The smartphone. 1 billion was sold last year.
But he has a stroke of good fortune as well, which is the next month.
The great tribes of Mongolia were locked in a spiral of murderous vendettas,
for whom the combined allure of military conquest and religious redemption proved irresistible.
It's hugely profitable.
Asia City prides itself on trust.
That suggests the wall was about more than just defending Chinese territory.
But whoever is of my kind cannot escape such an hour.
An adult swimming close to the seabed is well camouflaged.
December 1945. A squadron of U.S.
We have locomotives which help position the vessel in the middle of the chain,
which by the mid-Victorian era was coming under attack.
Than anything that any human has seen. Wow, that's pretty serious. You look up at it and they...
Glucose is going to be our new petroleum. We need a source for that glucose.
And slowly the trees began to die off.
The destruction is not unique. In Alaska, a forest died after an earthquake.
It's a fail.
Watch the stopper as I lower it towards the superfluid.
And then you start to pull that big lump of dough apart. And if you pull slowly, some of those pieces will stretch. And
the midday sun beats down on the rookies, who cope by...
It's immensely tricky discussing the question of the relationship between Nietzsche and German fascism.
Il travaille dans les ateliers.
Dans les ateliers, n'est-ce pas? Dans les ateliers.
The Bank of England secretly transferred government bonds to RBS, which you could then swap in the markets for cash.
It worked very successfully, and the operations...
The Supreme Court voted to reinstate capital punishment.
A short flight from Las Vegas, deep in the Nevada desert.
As children, we had...
That means no electricity gets lost. Superconducting.
You're a champ. That was a lot of lines.
He's the ultimate motivation because I want...
Many of the key episodes of the Christians' exploits in the East, including the moment that the first Crusaders set out.
Because I'd never dealt with anything where you had one defense.
By any charioteers that came this way in Roman times.
How can anybody do it that many times without anybody being aware and, you know, and getting away with that?
A showdown between two ancient...
Alone. The Impala gather at a dead end.
The Democrat...
This thing is incredibly well built. Look at all these bricks. This is perfect, beautiful.
Tutankhamun did not have a lengthy reign. He was only a 9-year-old boy when he became... Its treasures were everything a pharaoh could desire to take...
To keep them warm in a cold sea.
They unveiled a model of a super caravel.
From the Atlantic Ocean, we'll follow the river to its furthest reaches, navigating round its powerful rapids and through its...
In November 1962, two nations, France and Britain, came together with a plan, one that would set...
Through 2016 to mid-September 2017.
And competing against locals at auctions.
Located 26 meters above sea level, it allowed the isthmus to be crossed without having to excavate the mountain. The Dutch then built windmills with a screw to pump the water away. Discharge...
The size of the earthquake is proportional to the surface area that actually moves during...
Their rival, Bank of Scotland, would become much larger than them, and they would then be...
The sharks themselves bear the unmistakable tooth marks of their own kind.
Some took souvenirs with them. Nobody took witness names. Literally several dozen witnesses left that night without ever being even identified by the French police. So...
Merson, yes! Took it so well.
It all started for me. She does have one advantage. Aside.
Most of my family are buried near my home.
To power 300,000 homes. But keeping the mighty blades turning...
Concorde now embarked on a rigorous program of flight testing.
The Raven's a noisy irritant.
According to some accounts, the stories were started by Anne's own ladies.
In 2004, that was a magnitude 9.1.
Things could get a little messy.
Completed a huge volcanic island that would have stuck up 3,000 or 4,000.
We're not so good for the Maya.
In fact, times were terrible for the Maya.
Fast random path generation, the robot could anticipate a potential accident and choose
It did make me wonder whether we had begun to create some sort of monster over which we had very...
Amazingly, he survived and ended his days as a monk.
They showed me one of my arm while I was laying on my arm.
Now more than 100 years old.
Would have been on the line.
My paternal grandmother, my brother. And we all go through.
300 miles north, in Giza.
You are looking at the development of Singapore 40 years ahead of time. And this is important because...
During the winter, the days are so short. And the temperature...
If just a few excess calories from sugar can cause issues...
Finally, the Lord showed us his lance, and I kissed its tip as it barely protruded from the ground.
Had just been deposed. A new regime was in charge, and Machiavelli served them as a high-flying diplomat.
After Carter removed the treasures from Tut's tomb, they ended...
Because they're so aggressive. It'll be hard for Shaka's rookies to take...
Swings from one to the other.
Although the content of Henry's letter to Jane Seymour is not known, Jane's reaction to the King's overture
The head of the French police inquiry says the passengers in the car were not the issue.
On the other hand, the seller knows what he wants. It's time to hang.
The fact that you had to buy just a certain...
God is...
Our little guy is understandably dubious.
Wes has found something that hints at what was to come.
I arrived at Constantinople with great joy by the grace of God.
They're native to the shallow waters of the Amazon basin and boast dramatic flower.
Sailing thousands of miles in search of wealth and power.
He's quieting the storm.